I was not meant to survive that winter, but I did, and the price of my survival was a house full of ghosts and a man who had forgotten how to feel. The carriage that brought me to Thornwood Hall arrived under a sky so heavy with rain it seemed the clouds themselves were mourning. I remember pressing my gloved hand against the cold window, watching the iron gates part like reluctant arms, and thinking that I had never seen a place so determined to keep its secrets. The estate rose from the fog like a promise no one intended to keep, its stone walls darkened by decades of silence, its windows watching me with the indifference of eyes that had seen too many women come and go. I was 23 years old. I had buried my father 6 months before, sold everything we owned to pay his debts, and answered an advertisement in a London paper that offered respectable employment for a woman of education and discretion. The position was for a governess. The child was described only as quiet. The salary was generous enough to make me suspicious, but desperation has a way of silencing doubt. The housekeeper who greeted me at the door was a woman named Mrs. Holloway, and she had the kind of face that had long ago decided smiling was a waste of effort. She took my coat without a word, led me through a corridor lined with portraits of pale-faced ancestors, and deposited me in a sitting room where a fire crackled but offered no warmth. I was told to wait. The Duke, she said, would receive me when he was ready. I waited for nearly an hour. The rain continued its assault against the windows, and I studied the room with the careful attention of someone who knows she is being studied in return. The furniture was old, but immaculate. The curtains were drawn against the storm, and the only light came from the fire and a single candelabra on the mantel. There were no flowers, no personal touches, nothing to suggest that anyone who lived here had ever known joy. When the door finally opened, I rose too quickly and nearly stumbled. The man who entered was not what I had expected. The Duke of Blackmere was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 35, with dark hair that fell across a forehead creased by thoughts he never shared. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and distant, and when they settled on me, I felt as though I had been measured and found wanting in the span of a single heartbeat. He did not greet me. He did not offer his hand. He crossed to the fireplace, stood with his back to the flames, and regarded me with the expression of a man who had long ago stopped expecting anything from the world. "Miss Ashford," he said. My voice, when I answered, was steadier than I felt. "Yes, Your Grace." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "You understand the terms of your employment." I told him I did, though in truth the letter I had received had been vague to the point of obscurity. A child. Lessons. Discretion above all else. "The child," he continued, and I noticed the way his jaw tightened around the word, "is called Iris. She is 7 years old. She does not speak." I waited for him to explain, but he offered nothing more. "She is housed in the East Wing," he said. "You will take your meals there. You will not bring her to the main house unless I specifically request it. You will not discuss her with the other servants. You will not write of her in any correspondence." I should have asked questions. I should have demanded to know why a child of 7 was kept hidden like a shameful secret, why her existence was to be erased from every letter I might send, why a duke with all the power of his title could not bear to speak her name without pain. But I had learned, in the months since my father's death, that survival often required silence. So I simply nodded and said, "I understand, Your Grace." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the strangest sensation that he was searching for something in my face, some sign that I was different from the others who had come before me. Whatever he was looking for, he did not find it. His expression shuddered, and he turned away. "Miss Holloway will show you to your rooms," he said. "You will begin tomorrow." That was my introduction to the Duke of Blackmere. No welcome, no warmth, only a list of rules designed to keep a little girl invisible. Mrs. Holloway led me through passages that grew narrower and colder as we moved away from the main house. The East Wing, I soon discovered, was a separate world entirely. It had its own entrance, its own staircase, its own silence. The wallpaper here was faded, the carpets worn, and the portraits that lined the halls were covered with cloth, as if someone had decided that even the dead should not be allowed to watch. My room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a window that overlooked a garden so overgrown it had become a kind of wilderness. Mrs. Holloway pointed to a door at the far end of the corridor. "That is the nursery," she said. "The child sleeps there. She eats there. She does not leave unless accompanied by you, and you do not take her beyond the garden." I asked why. Mrs. Holloway's face did not change. "Because those are the rules," she said, and then she left me alone. I did not sleep that night. The wind howled against the walls, and the old house groaned as if it were in pain. I lay in the darkness and listened to the sounds of Thornwood Hall, trying to understand what kind of place I had entered. There was something wrong here. I could feel it in the way the servants avoided my eyes, in the way the Duke had spoken of the child as though she were a burden he could not set down, in the way the east wing had been sealed off from the rest of the house like a wound that refused to heal. In the morning, I gathered my courage and opened the nursery door. The room was larger than I had expected, filled with the gray light of another rainy day. There were shelves of books, a rocking horse in the corner, a small table set with paints and paper. And there, sitting by the window with her back to me, was a little girl with hair the color of midnight. I said her name softly. Iris. She did not turn. I crossed the room slowly, carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal, and knelt beside her chair. She was holding a doll, its porcelain face cracked and its dress stained with what might have been tears or rain. When she finally looked at me, I saw eyes that were too old for her face, gray as the Duke's, but filled with a sorrow no child should know. "I am Miss Ashford," I said. "I am going to be your governess." She stared at me without expression. "I am here to teach you," I continued, though I suspected she had already learned the hardest lessons life had to offer. "But I am also here to be your friend, if you will let me." Something flickered in her eyes then, something that might have been hope or might have been fear. She looked down at her doll, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she reached out and touched my hand. It was the smallest gesture, the barest acknowledgement that I existed. But in that moment, in that cold and silent nursery, it felt like a promise. I did not yet know what secrets Thornwood Hall was hiding. I did not yet know that the Duke's coldness was a mask for a grief so deep it had nearly destroyed him. I did not yet know that the child before me was not a distant cousin, as I had been told, but his own daughter, hidden away because her very existence was proof of a love that had been forbidden and a betrayal that had never been forgiven. But I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that I had not come to this house by accident. Something had led me here, to this little girl who did not speak, to this man who could not feel, to this house full of shadows and silence. And whatever that something was, it was not finished with me yet. The days that followed were quiet and strange. Iris did not speak, but she listened. She watched me with those solemn gray eyes as I read to her from books of fairy tales and history, as I taught her the letters of the alphabet, as I showed her how to mix colors on her palette until the paper bloomed with flowers she had never seen in the overgrown garden below. She was clever, far cleverer than anyone had given her credit for. She understood everything I said, and she communicated in her own way, through gestures and drawings and the pressure of her small hand in mine. I grew to love her. I could not help it. There was something in her silence that called to me, something that reminded me of my own childhood, of the years I had spent caring for my father as his mind wandered further and further from the present. I knew what it was to be alone in a house full of people. I knew what it was to carry secrets too heavy for small shoulders. and I began to notice things. Small things at first. The way the servants whispered when they thought I could not hear. The way Mrs. Holloway's eyes followed me whenever I passed through the main house. The way certain doors were always locked and certain questions were never answered. I told myself it was not my place to pry. I had been hired to teach a child, not to unravel the mysteries of a duke's household. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and I have never been good at leaving questions unanswered. It was on the third week of my employment that I first encountered the Dowager Duchess. I had taken Iris to the garden, as I did every afternoon when the rain allowed. The garden was a ruin of what must once have been magnificent, its paths choked with weeds, its fountains silent, its roses tangled into wild and thorny walls. But Iris loved it there. She would sit on the old stone bench and draw for hours, her pencil moving across the page with a sureness that belied her years. I was watching her draw when I heard the footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting Mrs. Holloway, and found instead a woman I had never seen before. She was perhaps 60 years old, dressed in black silk, her silver hair swept back from a face that was still beautiful despite the years. Her eyes were pale blue and cold as the winter sky, and when they settled on me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "So," she said, and her voice was the voice of a woman accustomed to obedience, "you are the new governess." I rose and curtsied, though my hands were trembling. "Yes, Your Grace." I had guessed who she was the moment I saw her. The Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Blackmere. She did not acknowledge my curtsy. She was staring past me, at Iris, and the expression on her face was one I could not read. It might have been hatred. It might have been grief. It might have been something far more complicated than either. "The other governesses did not last," she said. "They asked too many questions. They became too attached. They forgot their place." I said nothing. She turned her cold eyes back to me. "You would do well to learn from their mistakes, Miss Ashford. This is not a house for sentiment. The child is here because she must be. That is all you need to know." I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to demand why a little girl was spoken of as though she were a curse rather than a blessing. But the Dowager's eyes held a warning that I could not ignore. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that there were lines I must not cross. "I understand, Your Grace," I said. She smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. "I doubt that very much," she said, "but you will. In time, you will." She turned and walked away, and I watched her go with a feeling in my chest that I could not name. It was not fear, exactly. It was something closer to recognition. I had seen women like her before, women who believed that the world existed to serve their purposes, women who would destroy anyone who stood in their way. And in that moment, I knew that whatever secrets Thornwood Hall was hiding, the Dowager Duchess was at the center of them all. The weeks that followed the Dowager's warning were filled with a quiet tension I could not escape. I felt her presence everywhere, even when she was not there. In the way the servants lowered their voices when I entered a room. In the way Mrs. Holloway checked on Iris and me each evening, her eyes searching for some transgression she could report. In the way the Duke avoided the East Wing entirely, as though the very walls might burn him if he drew too close. But I did not leave. I could not. Iris had begun to trust me, and that trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered by another departure, another abandonment. I saw the way she watched the door each morning, the flicker of relief in her eyes when I appeared. I saw the way she clung to my hand during our walks in the garden, her small fingers wrapped around mine as though I were the only solid thing in a world that had taught her nothing was permanent. And so I stayed, and I watched, and I began to notice the things that did not fit. It started with the portraits. The ones in the East Wing had been covered, but the ones in the main house remained visible, and I studied them whenever I had reason to pass through. There were generations of Blackmeres on those walls, their faces stern and proud, their eyes following me with aristocratic disdain. But there was a gap between a portrait of the Duke as a young man, perhaps 20 years old, and the next painting. There was an empty space on the wall. The wallpaper there was slightly brighter, as though something had hung in that spot for many years before being removed. I asked Mrs. Holloway about it once, casually, as though the question were of no importance. She told me she did not know what I meant. When I pointed to the empty space, she looked at it as though she had never noticed it before, and then she said that some paintings had been sent away for cleaning and never returned. Her voice was steady, but her eyes would not meet mine. I did not ask again, but I remembered. The second thing I noticed was the locked room at the end of the East Wing corridor. It was the only door I had not been permitted to open, and Mrs. Holloway had made it clear that I was not to try. "It is storage," she had said. "Old furniture, nothing more." But I passed that door every day, and sometimes, late at night, I thought I heard sounds from within, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of paper. Once, I could have sworn I heard weeping, soft and muffled, as though someone were crying into a pillow to keep from being heard. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself this old house was full of strange noises, and I was letting my imagination run wild. But the sound stayed with me, and I began to dream of that locked door, of what might be hidden behind it, of secrets buried so deep they had become part of the walls themselves. The third thing I noticed was the Duke. He did not visit the East Wing. He did not ask about Iris's progress. He did not acknowledge her existence in any way that I could see. But sometimes, late in the evening, I would catch a glimpse of him standing at the window of his study, staring out at the garden where Iris and I spent our afternoons. His face, in those moments, was not cold. It was broken. It was the face of a man who wanted something he believed he could never have, who had taught himself to stop reaching because reaching only brought pain. I began to wonder what had happened to him, what had made him this way, what had driven him to hide his own child in a forgotten wing of his own house, to pretend she did not exist, to allow his mother to speak of her as though she were a stain to be scrubbed away. And then one afternoon, I found the letters. It was an accident, or so I told myself. Iris had been drawing, and her pencil had rolled beneath the wardrobe in the nursery. When I knelt to retrieve it, my hand brushed against something wedged behind the wooden frame. I pulled it out and found a bundle of papers, tied with a faded ribbon that had once been blue. They were letters, dozens of them, written in a hand I did not recognize, addressed to someone named only as my love. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough to make my heart stop. I read them there on the nursery floor, while Iris continued her drawing, oblivious to what I had found. They were love letters, passionate and tender and desperate. They spoke of stolen moments in the garden, of whispered promises in the dark, of a love that burned so brightly it threatened to consume everything in its path. And they spoke of a child, a daughter, a little girl who would be born in secret and raised in shadow because the world would never accept what her parents had done. The letters were not signed with a name. But there was one word, repeated again and again throughout the pages, a word that made everything suddenly, terribly clear. Iris. The child sleeping in the nursery was not a distant cousin. She was not an orphan taken in out of charity. She was the Duke's daughter, born of a love so forbidden that it had been erased from history. And the woman who had written these letters, the woman who had loved him with such fierce devotion, was gone, vanished, declared dead, perhaps, or driven away. But her words remained, hidden behind a wardrobe, waiting for someone to find them. I sat there for a long time, the letters in my lap, trying to understand what I had discovered. The Duke had loved someone. He had fathered a child with her. And then something had happened. Something terrible. Something that had torn them apart and left him with nothing but a daughter he could not acknowledge and a grief he could not escape. And the Dowager knew. She had to know. The way she looked at Iris, the way she spoke of her as a burden, the way she warned me not to become too attached. She knew exactly who this child was and exactly what had been done to her mother. I should have put the letters back. I should have pretended I had never found them, should have continued teaching Iris her alphabet and taking her for walks in the garden, should have collected my salary and kept my silence until I could find another position far from Thornwood Hall. That would have been the wise thing to do. That would have been the safe thing. But I thought of Iris. I thought of her gray eyes, so like her father's, and her silence that was not defiance, but survival. I thought of the way she drew flowers she had never seen and clung to my hand as though I might disappear. And I knew that I could not walk away from her. I could not leave her in this house of secrets, unloved and unacknowledged, while the woman who had destroyed her mother watched from the shadows. I kept the letters. I hid them beneath my mattress, and I resolved to find out the truth. The days that followed were dangerous ones. I continued my duties as though nothing had changed, but my eyes were open now, and I saw things I had missed before. The way the servants avoided speaking of the years before Iris's birth. The way certain rooms in the main house were kept locked, their contents unknown. The way the Dowager watched me with increasing suspicion, as though she sensed that something had shifted in the balance between us. I began to ask questions, carefully, cautiously, never pushing too hard or too fast. I asked the kitchen maid about the old days, about the Duke as a young man, about whether he had ever been in love. She blushed and stammered and said she was not at liberty to discuss His Grace's private affairs. I asked the gardener about the overgrown roses, about who had planted them, about why no one tended them anymore. He looked at me with sad eyes and said that some things were better left to grow wild than to be remembered. But it was Mrs. Holloway who finally gave me what I needed, though she did not mean to. I found her one evening in the housekeeper's parlor, staring at an old photograph in a silver frame. She did not hear me approach, and for a moment I stood in the doorway, watching her trace the outline of a face I could not see. When she finally noticed me, she startled so violently that the frame slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. I bent to retrieve it before she could stop me. And there, in the faded photograph, I saw a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, standing in the garden of Thornwood Hall. She was wearing a simple dress, not the gown of a lady, and there were roses in her hands. But her eyes were luminous, filled with a joy that seemed almost too bright for this somber house, and she looked exactly like Iris. Mrs. Holloway snatched the frame from my hands. "You should not be here," she said, her voice trembling. "You should not have seen that." "Who is she?" I asked. For a long moment, I thought she would not answer. She clutched the photograph to her chest, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. But something in her eyes broke, some wall that had been holding back years of silence and guilt. "Her name was Lily," she whispered. "She was a chambermaid here before you came, before everything changed." She looked at me, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. She loved him. God help her, she loved him, and he loved her. But his mother would never allow it. A duke does not marry a servant. A duke does not throw away his name and his title for a girl with nothing to offer but her heart. I asked what had happened to her. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "She was sent away," she said. "When the Dowager discovered the child, she was sent away in the night. I do not know where. I do not know if she lived or died. All I know is that she was here one day and gone the next, and His Grace was never the same." "And Iris," I said. "She is their daughter." Mrs. Holloway closed her eyes. "You did not hear that from me," she said. "You know nothing. If the Dowager learns that you have been asking questions, she will destroy you. She has destroyed everyone who has tried to uncover the truth." I left her there with her photograph and her guilt, and I walked back to the East Wing with my heart pounding in my chest. The pieces were falling into place now, one by one, forming a picture so terrible I could hardly bear to look at it. The Duke had fallen in love with a servant girl. They had conceived a child together, and when the Dowager discovered the truth, she had torn them apart, sending Lily away and condemning Iris to a life of shadows and silence. But one question remained, one question that gnawed at me with every step I took, every breath I drew. Where was Lily now? Was she truly dead, as the world believed? Or was she somewhere out there, alive and waiting, not knowing that her daughter was growing up without her in a house that denied her very existence? I did not know the answer, but I was determined to find it. That night, I made my decision. I would confront the Duke. I would show him the letters, tell him what I had learned, and demand the truth. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was quite possibly the end of everything I had worked for. But I could not stand by and watch a little girl be punished for the crime of being born. And I could not let the woman who had orchestrated this tragedy continue to rule unchallenged. I waited until the house was quiet, until the servants had retired and the only sounds were the creak of old wood and the whisper of the wind. Then I took the letters from beneath my mattress, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and walked through the dark corridors toward the Duke's study. The door was closed, but I could see light flickering beneath it. He was awake. He was waiting, perhaps, for something that would never come. I raised my hand to knock, and then I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if he did not want to know the truth? What if he had made peace with his loss, and my intrusion would only reopen wounds that had taken years to heal? But then I thought of Iris. I thought of her silence, her loneliness, her desperate grip on my hand, and I knew that whatever the cost, I had to try. I knocked on the door. For a moment, there was no response. Then I heard footsteps, and the door swung open, and the Duke of Blackmere stood before me with shadows in his eyes and a question on his lips. "Miss Ashford," he said, "it is late. What are you doing here?" I held up the letters. "I need to speak with you, Your Grace," I said, "about Iris, about her mother, about everything your mother has kept hidden from you." His face went pale. His hand gripped the doorframe so tightly I could see the bones beneath his skin. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, nothing in Thornwood Hall would ever be the same. He did not invite me in. He simply stepped aside, and I understood that the invitation was in what he did not say, in the way his eyes fell to the letters in my hands and stayed there as though he were looking at a ghost. The study was warm, lit by a fire that crackled in the hearth and candles that flickered on the mantel. There were books everywhere, stacked on shelves and piled on the desk, their spines worn from years of restless hands seeking escape. A glass of brandy sat untouched beside a chair that faced the window, the same window from which I had seen him watching the garden where Iris played. He closed the door behind me and leaned against it, as though he needed something solid to hold him upright. "Where did you find those?" he asked, and his voice was rough, scraped raw by something I could not name. I told him the truth. I had found them hidden in the nursery, wedged behind the wardrobe where Iris slept. I did not know who had put them there or why, but I had read them, and I knew what they meant. He was silent for a long moment. Then he crossed to the fireplace and stood with his back to me, his hands braced against the mantel, his head bowed. I watched the firelight play across his shoulders and waited for him to speak. "Her name was Lily," he said at last. "She came to Thornwood Hall when she was 17, a chambermaid, the daughter of a tenant farmer who had died in debt. My mother took her in as an act of charity, or so she claimed. But there was nothing charitable about my mother. There never has been." He turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were wet. "I was 24 years old," he continued. "I had just returned from university, full of ideas and ideals that my mother had spent years trying to crush. I thought I knew everything. I thought I could change the world. And then I saw Lily, and I realized I knew nothing at all." He told me their story in pieces, his voice breaking and mending as he spoke. How he had first noticed her in the garden, tending roses that his mother had ordered her to plant. How he had found excuses to speak with her, to walk with her, to learn the sound of her laugh and the light in her eyes. How he had fallen in love with her slowly and then all at once, the way a man falls into a river and realizes too late that he cannot swim. They had been careful. They had hidden their love in stolen moments, in whispered conversations behind closed doors, in letters passed through trusted hands. But love like theirs could not be contained. It spilled over, leaving traces that a watchful eye might follow. And his mother's eye was always watchful. "I did not know she was with child until it was too late," he said. "Lily told me in the garden, beneath the roses she had planted, and I swore to her that I would protect her, that I would marry her, scandal be damned, and raise our child as the heir to everything I owned. I was young enough to believe that love could conquer everything. I did not understand that love is precisely what makes us vulnerable." He fell silent, and I saw him struggling to continue. I stepped closer, holding out the letters like an offering. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I had seen it in the Dowager's eyes, in the empty space on the wall where a portrait should have hung, in the locked room at the end of the corridor that held secrets no one was meant to find. "My mother happened," he said. "She discovered the truth before I could act. She came to me in the night, after Lily had gone to bed, and she told me that if I did not end the affair immediately, she would see to it that Lily was destroyed, not merely sent away, destroyed. She had connections," she said, "powerful friends who could make a servant girl disappear without a trace, and she would use them if I forced her hand." His voice cracked. I did not believe her. I thought she was bluffing, trying to frighten me into obedience. So I refused. I told her I would marry Lily with or without her blessing, and I left to find my love and tell her that everything would be well. But when he reached Lily's room, she was gone. The bed was made, her belongings vanished, as though she had never existed at all. He searched the house, the grounds, the village beyond the gates. He questioned every servant, every tenant, every soul who might have seen where she had gone. But no one would answer him. No one would meet his eyes. "My mother told me she had left of her own accord," he said, "that she had been paid a sum of money and had chosen to disappear rather than face the scandal of bearing a bastard child. She showed me a letter, written in Lily's hand, saying that she did not love me, that she had never loved me, that I had been nothing but a means to an end. I did not believe it. I could not believe it. But I had no proof, and Lily was gone, and there was nothing I could do." He looked at me then, and I saw the full weight of his grief in his eyes. "For 7 years," he said, "I believed she had abandoned me, that she had taken my child and disappeared into a world I could not reach. I hired investigators. I wrote letters. I spent a fortune trying to find her. But it was as though she had vanished from the face of the earth. And Iris," I said, "how did she come to be here?" His jaw tightened. 3 years after Lily disappeared, a woman arrived at the gates of Thornwood Hall. She was carrying a child, a little girl with dark hair and gray eyes. She said she had been a friend of Lily's, that Lily had died in childbirth and had begged her with her last breath to bring the child to me. My mother wanted to turn them away, but I would not allow it. I brought Iris into this house and swore that I would protect her, even if I could never acknowledge her as my own. I understood then why he kept her hidden, why he could not look at her without pain. Every time he saw Iris, he saw Lily. He saw the love he had lost, the life he had been denied, the daughter who was both a gift and a reminder of everything that had been stolen from him. "But the letter," I said, "the one your mother showed you. You said it was written in Lily's hand." He nodded. "I have read it 1,000 times. I know every word by heart. It is her handwriting. I am certain of it. I thought of the letters I had found, the love and longing that poured from every page. The woman who had written those words would not have abandoned the man she loved. She would not have taken money and disappeared. She would have fought for him with every breath in her body. What if it was forged? I said. What if your mother forced her to write it, or had someone copy her hand? What if Lily did not leave by choice? He stared at me as though I had struck him. That is impossible, he said, but his voice wavered. My mother would not. She could not. Your mother is capable of anything, I said. I have seen the way she looks at Iris. I have heard the way she speaks of her. She does not see a child. She sees a threat, a reminder of something she thought she had erased. He turned away from me then, and I watched his shoulders shake with emotions he could not contain. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled in the hearth. The wind moaned against the windows. And somewhere in the east wing, a little girl slept without knowing that her father was finally, after all these years, beginning to question the lies he had been told. I should have left then. I had delivered the letters, spoken my piece, planted the seeds of doubt that might one day bloom into truth. But something held me there, something in the way he stood with his back to me, alone in his grief, carrying a burden no one had ever helped him bear. Your Grace, I said softly. Henry. He turned at the sound of his name, and I saw surprise flicker across his face. No one had called him that in years. No one had dared. Iris loves you, I said. She does not understand why you stay away, why you cannot look at her, why you have kept her hidden from the world. But she loves you, and she needs you. Whatever happened in the past, whatever your mother has done, you cannot punish your daughter for it. She is innocent. She is the only innocent one in this entire house. He closed his eyes. I know, he whispered. God help me, I know. But every time I look at her, I see Lily. I see everything I lost. And I cannot bear it. Then learn to bear it, I said. For her sake. She has no one else. He opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I had arrived at Thornwood Hall, and I saw something in his gaze that I had not expected. Not gratitude, exactly, something deeper, something that made my heart beat faster in my chest. You are not like the others, he said, the other governesses. They were afraid of this house, afraid of my mother, afraid of me, but you are not afraid. I am terrified, I admitted, but I have learned that fear is not a reason to stop. It is only a reason to be careful. He almost smiled. It was a ghost of an expression, there and gone in an instant, but I saw it, and I knew that something had changed between us. Some wall had crumbled, some door had opened that could not easily be closed. I will think about what you have said, he told me, about Lily, about Iris, about everything. But I must ask you to be careful. My mother is not a woman to be crossed. If she learns that you have been asking questions, that you have found these letters, she will do everything in her power to remove you from this house. I know, I said, and you will stay anyway. I thought of Iris, asleep in the nursery, waiting for me to return. I thought of the letters hidden beneath my mattress, filled with words of love that had never been answered. I thought of Lily, wherever she was, and the child she had left behind. I will stay, I said, for as long as Iris needs me. He nodded slowly. Then we understand each other. I left him there in his study, surrounded by books and shadows and the weight of years he could not escape. But as I walked back to the east wing, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Small and fragile, like a candle flame in a storm, but real. The Duke was not the cold and unfeeling man I had believed him to be. He was wounded. He was grieving. But beneath the ice, there was still a heart capable of love. And if he could learn to love his daughter, perhaps he could learn to face the truth about his mother. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the old house settling around me, and I thought about what I had learned. The Dowager had separated Henry from the woman he loved. She had lied to him, manipulated him, stolen his child's mother, and made him believe she had abandoned him. For 7 years, she had watched him suffer, watched Iris grow up in shadow and silence, and she had done nothing to ease their pain. Why? What could possibly justify such cruelty? The answer came to me as the first light of dawn crept through my window. Power. Control. The Dowager could not bear to lose her grip on her son, could not allow him to choose a path she had not sanctioned. Lily had been a threat to everything she valued, a servant who dared to love above her station, a woman who might have given Henry the courage to defy his mother at last. And so, she had been removed, erased, buried in lies so deep that even now, 7 years later, Henry did not know if she was alive or dead. But I would find out. Whatever it took, whatever risks I had to run, I would discover what had truly happened to Lily. Not just for Iris, not just for Henry, for myself. Because I had begun to care for them both more than I should, more than was wise, more than a governess had any right to care. And because I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that the Dowager was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The battle lines had been drawn, and I had chosen my side. The days that followed my conversation with the Duke were strange and suspended, like the held breath before a storm. He did not seek me out, but I felt his presence in ways I had not before. The locked door to the east wing was unlocked. Fresh flowers appeared in the nursery, roses from the garden that Lily had planted. And once, just once, I saw him standing at the edge of the overgrown paths, watching Iris draw, his face soft with an emotion I dared not name. Iris noticed the changes, too. She began to watch the door with a different kind of attention, not the fearful vigilance of a child expecting abandonment, but the hopeful anticipation of one who senses that something is shifting. She still did not speak, but her drawings changed. Where once she had drawn only flowers and birds, she now drew figures. A tall man with dark hair, a woman in a simple dress, a little girl standing between them, holding both their hands. I asked her once who the people in her drawings were. She looked at me with those solemn gray eyes and pressed her hand to her heart. Then she pressed it to mine. I understood. She was drawing dreams. She was drawing the family she wished she had. But even as hope began to bloom in the east wing, danger was gathering elsewhere. The Dowager had noticed the changes, too, and she did not approve. I first became aware of her suspicion when I found Mrs. Holloway waiting for me outside the nursery one morning. Her face was pale, her hands twisted together in her apron. She pulled me into an alcove and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "The Dowager has been asking about you," she said. "About what you do, where you go, whom you speak with. She knows something is different. She knows you have been talking to His Grace." I asked her what I should do. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "Leave," she said. "Take a reference and go before she decides you are a threat. I have seen what happens to those who cross her. I do not wish to see it happen to you." I thanked her for the warning, but I did not take her advice. I could not. Iris needed me. Henry needed me, though he would never admit it. And somewhere out there, Lily might still be alive, waiting for someone to find her. Instead of retreating, I pressed forward. I began to search in earnest, using every moment I could steal from my duties to explore the corners of Thornwood Hall that I had been forbidden to enter. The locked room at the end of the corridor haunted me. I was certain it held answers, certain that whatever the Dowager was hiding, she had hidden it there. The key was the problem. Mrs. Holloway kept all the keys on a ring at her belt, and she guarded them jealously. But servants talk, and I had learned from my time in this house that there were always secrets within secrets. One evening, I overheard 2 maids whispering about a spare set of keys kept in the housekeeper's parlor, hidden in a box beneath the floorboards. The previous housekeeper had kept them there, they said, in case of emergency. Mrs. Holloway did not know they existed. I waited until the house was asleep. Then I crept through the darkened corridors to the parlor, found the loose board beneath the rug, and retrieved a ring of tarnished keys that had not been touched in years. My hands trembled as I counted them. There were 7 in all, each one a different size, each one a possible answer to a different locked door. The locked room in the east wing was my destination. I moved through the shadows like a ghost, listening for footsteps, watching for the flicker of candlelight that would signal discovery. But the house was silent, and I reached the door without incident. The 3rd key fit. The lock turned with a groan of protest, and the door swung open to reveal a room I had not expected. It was not storage. It was a bedroom. The furniture was covered with dust cloths, but beneath them I could see the shapes of a bed, a vanity, a wardrobe. The curtains were drawn tight against the window, and the air was thick with the smell of lavender and age. I lit the candle I had brought and held it high, watching the flame dance across walls that had not seen light in years. There were paintings here. The missing portraits from the main house, I realized. Portraits of a young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, portraits that showed her in the garden, in the ballroom, standing beside a young man who could only be Henry. In every image she was smiling. In every image she looked like she belonged. And then I saw it. A small trunk at the foot of the bed, its lid slightly ajar. I knelt beside it and lifted the cover, and my breath caught in my throat. It was full of letters. Hundreds of them, all written in the same hand, all addressed to Lily at an address I did not recognize. They had never been sent. The envelopes were sealed, the stamps unmarked, as though someone had collected them over the years and kept them hidden here, in this forgotten room. But it was not the letters that made my heart stop. It was the document beneath them. A certificate of death. Lily Margaret Wren. Died in childbirth. The date was 3 years after she had been sent away, the same year that Iris had been brought to Thornwood Hall. And at the bottom, a signature I recognized. The Dowager's hand. She had signed the document herself. She had declared Lily dead, had created an official record that would stand up to any inquiry, had erased the woman her son loved from existence with a single stroke of her pen. But was it true? Had Lily really died, or was this just another of the Dowager's lies? I searched the trunk for more evidence, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the candle steady. And there, at the very bottom, I found what I was looking for. A letter, different from the others. This one was not sealed. It was written on paper that was newer than the rest, and the ink was still dark. It was addressed to no one, but it was clearly meant to be read. I know what you did. I know the truth. Lily did not die in childbirth. You sent her to the asylum in Blackwood, and you paid them to keep her there. You told the world she was dead, but she is alive. She has been alive all these years, locked away while her daughter grows up without her. The letter was unsigned, but I did not need a signature to know who had written it. This was Mrs. Holloway's hand. I recognized the careful, precise strokes from the household accounts I had seen her keep. Mrs. Holloway knew. She had known all along, and she had said nothing. I sat there on the dusty floor, the letter in my hands, trying to understand what I had discovered. Lily was alive. She was in an asylum, a place for the mad, the inconvenient, the women that society wished to forget. She had been there for 7 years while her daughter learned to stop speaking and her lover learned to stop hoping. The Dowager had not simply separated them. She had buried Lily alive. I do not know how long I stayed in that room. Time lost meaning in the darkness, and it was only when I heard footsteps in the corridor that I came back to myself. I gathered the death certificate and Mrs. Holloway's letter, tucked them into my dress, and slipped out of the room just as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows. I did not go back to bed. I went straight to the nursery and sat beside Iris while she slept, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, the flutter of her eyelids as she dreamed. She looked so much like her mother. The same dark hair, the same gentle features, the same stubborn set to her jaw. She had never known Lily, had never felt her mother's arms around her, had never heard her voice. But that was about to change. I waited until Iris woke, helped her dress, fed her breakfast, and settled her with her paints before I went to find Henry. He was in his study, as I had known he would be, staring at the fire with the empty eyes of a man who had long ago stopped expecting anything from the world. I did not knock. I simply opened the door and stepped inside, and when he looked up at me, I held out the documents I had found. "I know where Lily is," I said. "She is alive. Your mother has been keeping her in an asylum for 7 years." He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stared at me, as though I had told him the sun had risen in the west. I placed the death certificate and Mrs. Holloway's letter on the desk in front of him. "Read them," I said. "Read them and tell me I am wrong." He read them. I watched his face as the words sank in, watched the color drain from his cheeks, watched his hands begin to tremble. When he finished, he looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Rage. It was not the cold fury of a man who has been wronged. It was the white-hot anger of a man who has been betrayed by the one person he should have been able to trust, his mother, the woman who had raised him, shaped him, controlled every aspect of his life. She had stolen his love. She had stolen his daughter's mother, and she had done it with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. "I will kill her," he said, and his voice was so quiet it was almost a whisper. "I will kill her for what she has done." "No," I said. I stepped forward and placed my hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his sleeve. "That is not what Lily would want. That is not what Iris needs. We must be smarter than that. We must find proof that cannot be denied, and we must confront her where she cannot escape." He looked at me, and I saw the rage slowly give way to something else: determination, purpose, a reason to fight after years of surrender. "What do you propose?" he asked. I told him my plan. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It required him to face his mother directly, to accuse her of crimes she would never admit, to tear down the facade of respectability she had spent her entire life constructing. But it was the only way to save Lily, the only way to give Iris her mother back, the only way to break the Dowager's grip on this house and everyone in it. He listened in silence. When I finished, he nodded once. "Tomorrow," he said. "We do this tomorrow." That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake listening to the wind howl against the walls, thinking about what the morning would bring. I thought about Lily, alone in that asylum, wondering if anyone would ever come for her. I thought about Iris, who might finally know the truth about where she came from. I thought about Henry, who was about to confront the woman who had destroyed his life. And I thought about myself, about the feelings I had tried to deny, the connection I had tried to ignore. I had come to Thornwood Hall as a governess, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, I had become something else: a protector, a truth seeker, a woman who had fallen in love with a man she could never have. Because even if we succeeded, even if we brought Lily home, there would be no place for me in this story. Henry would have his love returned to him. Iris would have her mother, and I would be the governess who had outlived her usefulness, who had no claim on anything except a reference and a monthly salary. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself that saving them was enough. But in the darkness of that long night, I allowed myself to feel the ache of wanting something I could not name, something I could not keep, something that would slip through my fingers like sand the moment Lily walked back through the doors of Thornwood Hall. The morning came too quickly. I rose with the sun, dressed in my most severe gown, and went to wake Iris. She looked at me with those knowing eyes, and I wondered how much she understood of what was about to happen. I brushed her hair and tied it with a ribbon and told her that today was going to be a very important day. She touched my cheek with her small hand. And then, For the first time since I had known her, she spoke. "Mama," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but the word was clear. "Mama." I pulled her into my arms and held her tight, my heart breaking and mending all at once. She had spoken. After 7 years of silence, she had finally found her voice. And I knew then that whatever happened next, whatever the Dowager tried to do to stop us, we would not fail. We could not fail. Not when there was so much at stake. Not when a little girl had finally dared to hope. I took her hand, and together we walked out of the nursery to meet whatever was waiting for us. The battle was about to begin. The drawing room had never felt so cold. The fire burned in the hearth, the candles flickered on the mantel, but there was a chill in the air that no flame could touch. It was the chill of reckoning, of truths too long buried, of a house about to crack open and spill its secrets onto the polished floors. Henry stood by the window, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him. He had not slept. I could see it in the shadows beneath his eyes, in the tension that ran through his shoulders like a wire pulled too tight. But there was something else in him now, something that had been absent for years. He looked like a man who had finally remembered what it meant to fight. I stood near the door with Iris beside me, her small hand gripping mine with a strength that belied her years. She had not spoken again since that single word in the nursery, but her silence now was different. It was the silence of anticipation, of waiting, of a child who sensed that the world was about to change. The Dowager entered precisely at 10 o'clock, as Henry had requested. She swept into the room in her customary black silk, her silver hair perfectly arranged, her face a mask of aristocratic composure. She did not acknowledge my presence. She did not glance at Iris. She looked only at her son, and there was something in her eyes that might have been suspicion or might have been contempt. "You summoned me," she said. Her voice was cool, measured, utterly without warmth. "I hope this is important. I have matters to attend to." Henry did not turn from the window. "Sit down, Mother. I beg your pardon?" He turned then, and I saw the Dowager's face flicker with something that looked almost like fear. She had never seen him like this. She had spent 35 years molding him, controlling him, teaching him that obedience was the price of peace. She had never imagined he might one day refuse to pay. "Sit down," he said again, and this time his voice left no room for argument. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, her spine rigid, her eyes never leaving his face. I watched her and felt a strange mixture of hatred and pity. She was a woman who had built her entire life on control, on the manipulation of those weaker than herself. And now, for the first time, she was about to lose. Henry crossed to the desk and picked up the documents I had found. The death certificate, Mrs. Holloway's letter, the evidence of 7 years of lies. "Do you recognize these?" he asked, and held them out for her to see. The Dowager's face did not change. "I do not know what you are talking about. Then, allow me to explain." Henry's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of years of suppressed rage. "This is a death certificate for Lily Margaret Wren. It bears your signature. It declares that she died in childbirth 7 years ago. But we both know that is not true, do we not?" The Dowager said nothing. Her eyes flickered to me, and I saw the calculation behind them, the quick assessment of how much I knew and how I might be silenced. "This," Henry continued, holding up the second document, "is a letter written by Mrs. Holloway. It states that Lily did not die, that you had her committed to the asylum at Blackwood, that you paid them to keep her there, to keep her silent, to make the world believe she was dead while she rotted in a cell for the crime of loving me." Silence. The fire crackled. The wind moaned against the windows. And still, the Dowager did not speak. Henry stepped closer to his mother, and I saw her flinch, just slightly, just enough to betray the fear she was trying to hide. "I loved her," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "I loved her with everything I had. And you took her from me. You told me she had abandoned me. You showed me a letter you claimed she had written, renouncing me, denying our child. And I believed you. God help me. I believed you because I could not imagine that my own mother would be capable of such cruelty. She had to go, the Dowager said at last. Her voice was calm, almost reasonable, as though she were explaining a simple matter of household management. She was a servant, a nobody. She would have destroyed everything our family has built. She would have made you a laughingstock, would have dragged the Blackmere name through the mud. I did what was necessary to protect you. You did what was necessary to protect yourself, Henry said. You did not care about me. You did not care about Lily. You certainly did not care about Iris. You cared only about your precious reputation, your precious control, your precious illusion that the Blackmere family was above the common failings of humanity. He threw the documents onto the table in front of her. But it is over now, Mother. I am going to Blackwood today. I am going to bring Lily home, and when I return, you will leave this house and never set foot in it again. The Dowager's composure finally cracked. You cannot do this, she said, and there was something close to panic in her voice. I am your mother. I have devoted my life to this family, to preserving what generations of Blackmeres have built. You cannot throw me out like a common servant. You threw Lily out, I said. The words came before I could stop them, and suddenly both of them were looking at me. You threw her out in the middle of the night, pregnant and alone, and you locked her away in an asylum for 7 years. You let her daughter grow up thinking her mother was dead. You let your own son believe the woman he loved had betrayed him. And now, you ask for mercy? The Dowager's eyes narrowed. You, she said, and her voice was pure venom. You are the cause of this. You came into this house and poisoned my son against me. You dug up secrets that should have stayed buried. You have destroyed everything. No, I said. I took a step forward, and I felt Iris's hand tighten in mine. You destroyed everything. I simply refused to let you bury the truth any longer. She rose from her chair, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But Henry stepped between us, his body a shield, his presence a barrier she could not cross. Leave, Mother, he said. Pack your things and go to the townhouse in London. I will send your allowance quarterly. But if you ever try to contact Lily, if you ever try to harm anyone in this house again, I will expose everything you have done. I will tell the world that the Dowager Duchess of Blackmere imprisoned an innocent woman to protect her own vanity. Do you understand? The Dowager looked at her son, and I saw something die in her eyes. The control she had wielded for decades, the power she had held over everyone in her orbit, was slipping away. She had made a mistake, one terrible mistake, and now she was losing everything. You will regret this, she said. Her voice was cold, but there was a tremor beneath it. One day, you will realize that I was right, that I was only trying to protect you. I have regretted many things in my life, Henry said, but this will not be one of them. She turned and walked out of the room without another word. I listened to her footsteps fade down the corridor, listened to the distant sound of doors opening and closing as she gathered her belongings. And then, at last, there was silence. Henry stood with his back to me for a long moment. His shoulders were shaking, and I realized with a start that he was crying. All those years of suppressed grief, all those years of believing the worst of the woman he loved, were finally breaking through the walls he had built around his heart. I went to him. I did not think about propriety, about the boundaries that separated a governess from a duke. I simply placed my hand on his arm and stood beside him while he wept. "Thank you," he said at last. His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "Thank you for giving me back my life." I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I simply stayed with him, and after a time, I felt a small hand slip into his. Iris had crossed the room without either of us noticing. She stood between us now, looking up at her father with those gray eyes that were so like his own. "Papa," she said. It was only the second word she had spoken in 7 years. But it was enough. Henry knelt down and gathered his daughter into his arms, and I watched as the last of his walls came crumbling down. We left for Blackwood that afternoon. Henry had wanted to go alone, but I insisted on accompanying him. Iris needed to stay at Thornwood Hall, safe in Mrs. Holloway's care, but I could not let Henry face this alone. He had spent 7 years in darkness. He should not have to walk into the light without someone beside him. The asylum was a gray stone building set on a hill overlooking a barren moor. It looked more like a prison than a hospital, its windows barred, its walls stained with decades of rain and neglect. The matron who greeted us was a stern woman with suspicious eyes, and she did not want to admit us until Henry showed her the documents proving his identity and his authority. We were led through corridors that smelled of lie and despair. I heard sounds from behind locked doors, sounds I tried not to identify. And then, at the end of a long hallway, the matron stopped before a door, no different from the others, and produced a key from the ring at her belt. "She is quiet," the matron said. "She has been quiet for years. We thought she had lost her mind entirely, but the physician says there is nothing wrong with her. She simply does not speak." She opened the door, and I saw Henry's face go pale. The room was small and bare, with a narrow bed, a single chair, and a window too high to reach. And sitting in the corner, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face thin and worn by years of captivity, was a woman I recognized from the portraits I had found in the locked room. Lily. She did not look up when we entered. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor, as though she had long ago stopped expecting anything from the world. She looked like a ghost, a shadow of the vibrant young woman in those paintings. But she was alive. After everything the Dowager had done, she was still alive. Henry crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her. "Lily," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "Lily, it is me. It is Henry." She raised her head. Her eyes, dark and deep, focused on his face with an intensity that made my heart ache. For a long moment, she did not speak. And then, slowly, a tear slipped down her cheek. "You came," she whispered. "After all this time, you came." He gathered her into his arms, and I turned away to give them privacy. I stood by the door, listening to their murmured words, their broken sobs, their desperate reassurances that this was real, that they had found each other again, that the nightmare was finally over. When they finally emerged from the room, Lily was leaning on Henry's arm, her steps unsteady but determined. She looked at me with those dark eyes, and I saw gratitude there, and curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "You are the one who found me," she said. Her voice was rough from years of disuse, but it was beautiful. "You are the one who saved us." I shook my head. "I only found the truth," I said. "Henry did the rest." She smiled, and for a moment I saw the young woman from the portraits, the woman who had planted roses in the garden and loved a duke with all her heart. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for not giving up." We brought her home to Thornwood Hall as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Mrs. Holloway met us at the door with Iris in her arms, and I watched as mother and daughter saw each other for the first time in 7 years. Iris did not hesitate. She ran to Lily with a cry that was half joy and half anguish, and Lily caught her and held her and wept into her dark hair. They stood there in the doorway, wrapped in each other's arms, while the rest of us looked on with tears in our eyes. That night, I packed my things. I did not tell anyone what I was doing. I simply folded my dresses, gathered my few belongings, and prepared to leave Thornwood Hall. My work here was done. Iris had her mother. Henry had his love. They did not need a governess anymore. They needed time to heal, time to rebuild, time to become the family they should have been all along. I was nearly finished when there was a knock at my door. Henry stood in the corridor, his face pale in the candlelight. "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. "My position here is no longer necessary," I replied. "Iris has her mother now. You do not need me." He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Eleanor," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips made my heart ache. "I know what you are thinking. I know you believe that Lily's return means there is no place for you here, but you are wrong." I looked at him, not understanding. "Lily is the woman you love," I said. "She is Iris's mother. I am only the governess who happened to uncover the truth." "You are far more than that," he said. He crossed to me and took my hands in his, and I felt the warmth of his touch spreading through my cold fingers. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave me back the woman I thought I had lost. You saved us all. How could I ever let you go? But Lily and I have spoken," he said. "We have spoken of everything, of the years we lost, of the love we shared, of the future we might have had. And we have both realized that the people we were 7 years ago no longer exist. We have been through too much, suffered too much, changed too much. We will always care for each other. We will always be bound by Iris. But we are not the same people who fell in love in the garden all those years ago." He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are the one who woke me from my grief," he said. "You are the one who gave me the courage to fight. You are the one I want by my side, not because of duty or obligation, but because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." I could not speak. I could only look at him. This man who had been so cold and distant when I first arrived, who had hidden his heart behind walls of ice and silence. He was not cold now. He was warm and real, and looking at me with an expression that made my knees weak. "I love you too," I whispered. "I have loved you since the night you first told me about Lily. I loved you when I thought I could never have you. And I love you now, even though I still cannot quite believe this is real." He smiled, and it was the first real smile I had ever seen on his face. "Then believe it," he said, "because I am not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." He kissed me then, in the small room where I had planned to pack my life away, and I knew that everything I had been through had led me to this moment. The grief of losing my father, the desperation that had driven me to answer an advertisement for a governess, the courage that had made me stay when every instinct told me to run. I had come to Thornwood Hall expecting nothing. I was leaving with everything. The months that followed were ones of healing and rebuilding. Lily recovered slowly, her strength returning as the horrors of the asylum faded into memory. She and Henry developed a friendship born of shared history and mutual respect, but it was clear to everyone that their romantic love belonged to the past. She devoted herself to Iris, to making up for all the years they had lost, and I watched their bond grow stronger with each passing day. Iris began to speak more and more, her voice growing confident as she realized that the people around her were not going to disappear. She called Lily Mama and Henry Papa, and she called me Eleanor, though sometimes when she was very tired or very happy, she would slip and call me Mama too. I did not correct her. I simply held her close and thanked whatever forces had brought me to this strange and wonderful family. Henry and I were married in the spring, in the garden where Lily had once planted roses. The flowers were blooming again, tended now by a gardener who understood that some things were worth saving. Lily stood beside me as I spoke my vows, and Iris scattered petals at our feet. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to belong. The Dowager never returned to Thornwood Hall. She lived out her days in the London townhouse, alone with her bitterness and her regrets. I heard that she died some years later, unmourned and unremembered, a cautionary tale about the price of cruelty. I tried to feel sorry for her, but I could not. She had caused too much pain, destroyed too many lives, and in the end, she had only destroyed herself. As for me, I became the Duchess of Blackmere, though the title never mattered as much as the family I had gained. I raised Iris as my own, loved Henry with a depth I had never known possible, and found in Lily a friend and sister I had never expected. We built a life together, the four of us, in a house that had once been full of shadows and secrets. But there were no more secrets now. Only love and laughter and the quiet joy of belonging to each other. I think sometimes of the girl I was when I first arrived at Thornwood Hall, the desperate young woman who had lost everything and was willing to take any position that offered survival. I did not know then what awaited me behind those iron gates. I did not know that I would find a silent child who needed me, a broken man who loved me, and a truth that would change everything. I only knew that I had to keep going, that giving up was not an option, that somewhere, somehow, there had to be something better waiting for me. And there was. There always is, for those who have the courage to seek it. This is my story, the story of how I faced the Dowager alone and watched a duke collapse when I revealed what I knew. The story of how a governess became a duchess and a silent child found her voice and a buried love was brought back into the light. It is a story of secrets and lies, of betrayal and redemption, of the fierce and terrible power of a mother's love and the even fiercer power of truth. But mostly, it is a story of hope, of the belief that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will always come. And it did. For all of us, it finally did.